Laura's guardian. Early the following afternoon, Nancy Drew and Helen Corning, faithful to their promise, boarded a launch which made regular passenger trips and were ferried to the lakeside hotel. "I wonder if Laura's guardian has arrived yet?" Helen remarked curiously as the two girls walked toward the hotel, which was one of the most exclusive on Moon Lake. "We'll soon meet him if he's here," Nancy replied. "I do hope he's the right sort." Laura would be dreadfully unhappy with anyone who didn't understand her. She's frightened to death at the thought of meeting him. Do you imagine that was why she asked us to come here this particular afternoon? Yes, I do, Helen. It was as plain as the nose on your face. To tell you the truth, I'm curious to meet Jacob Aborn. The conversation ended abruptly as the two girls entered the hotel lobby. Nancy Drew made her way directly to the desk and after a brief wait was informed that Laura Pendleton would receive the girls in her suite. An elevator whisked them to the third floor. Scarcely had they knocked on the door when Laura opened it. "Oh, I'm so glad you came," she cried. "I was afraid you wouldn't." She led the girls into a pleasant suite. There was no need to ask if Jacob Aborn had arrived, for Laura's eyes disclosed that she was deeply troubled. As Nancy stepped into the living room, she saw the man slumped down in a chair near the window. When Laura politely presented him, he arose and grunted a "pleased to meet you," without warmth. Nevertheless, his shrewd eyes swept the two girls appraisingly. Jacob Aborn was a short, pudgy man, but apparently he lacked the good disposition commonly attributed to a fat man, for a tiny scowl lined his forehead. He was well-dressed and wore a large diamond on his right hand. "I was afraid I wouldn't get to see you girls again," Laura began hastily, when an awkward silence fell upon the group. "I'm leaving this afternoon." "You're leaving Moon Lake so soon?" Nancy inquired, with a curious glance directed toward Jacob Aborn. "Yes," Laura declared without enthusiasm. "My guardian is taking me to Melrose Lake." "That's a long way from here, isn't it?" 20 miles, I believe, Nancy responded. "I'm sorry you're leaving." "So am I," Laura told her wistfully. "I like it here, and I was just beginning to get acquainted." "Must you go so soon?" "The air is much better at Melrose Lake," Jacob Aborn broke in. "Laura isn't in very good health, and it's my duty to take care of her. I promised her dear mother I would look after her." "I never heard that Melrose Lake was particularly healthful," Nancy commented dryly. "I have a fine bungalow there," Jacob Aborn added hastily. "That's another reason for leaving. It will be much nicer for Laura than living in a hotel." "Possibly you are right," Nancy admitted reluctantly. She had taken an instant dislike to Jacob Aborn, although she realized that she had no reason for her feeling. He seemed kind enough to Laura and apparently deeply interested in her welfare. Yet at times his eyes had a hard, almost cruel, glint as he gazed upon her. Nancy was ashamed of her suspicion, yet she could not help but wonder if the man's affection for his ward was genuine. Laura glanced nervously at her guardian. It was obvious that she was uneasy in his presence. "Would you girls care to have tea in the garden?" she proposed hopefully. "That would be lovely," Helen said quickly. She, too, had taken a violent dislike to Jacob Aborn and was eager for an opportunity to get away. It would be a relief to have a quiet talk with Laura. However, Jacob Aborn had no intention of permitting Laura's plan to be carried into effect. He picked up his hat and bestowed a saccharine smile upon his ward. "I will go with you, my dear." It was clear to Nancy Drew that he was determined Laura should not have a chance to talk with her friends alone. Something is wrong, she thought. Laura doesn't want to go to Melrose Lake, and he's forcing her to do it. The afternoon was a failure so far as Laura Pendleton and her friends were concerned. They spent a miserable half-hour over the teacups, attempting to keep up a conversation. Laura's face was pale, and her eyes held an expression of fear. Jacob Aborn appeared not to notice. He gulped his tea in one swallow, crumbled his cake upon the tablecloth, and then, tilting back his chair, proceeded to regale Nancy and Helen with tales of his brilliant business ventures. His stories, which were obvious untruths, disgusted the girls, but for Laura's sake they listened politely. "I'm going to make Laura's money earn real interest," he boasted. "I'll invest it in stocks." If you know the ropes, you can beat the market every time. Nancy Drew raised her eyebrows in well-bred disapproval. Will the court sanction such speculation? The court? What's that got to do with it? Jacob Aborn demanded. As Laura's legal guardian, you will be responsible for the money and will have to make an accounting, Nancy informed him. My father is a lawyer, so I know. Jacob Aborn stared at her somewhat hostilely. Oh yes, to be sure, he muttered. Pushing back his chair, he called loudly for a waiter. Greatly to Laura's embarrassment, persons at other tables turned and stared at him curiously. Waiter. My check, he ordered with a grand flourish. The bill settled, he turned to Laura with sudden decision. You must get your things packed at once, my dear. We are leaving in half an hour for Melrose Lake. But you said we were to remain here until late this afternoon, Laura protested. I haven't had a chance to talk with Nancy and Helen. I am sorry, but we must leave at once. Your friends will excuse you. It doesn't seem right to rush away like this. When I invited you girls here to spend the afternoon, Laura apologized. She was on the verge of tears as she faced Nancy and Helen. We'll surely see you again sometime soon, Nancy Drew promised. Oh, if you only will. You must come to Melrose Lake. I don't know a soul there and I'll be so lonesome. She turned to her guardian. What is the address? I want Nancy and Helen to have it. Jacob Aborn frowned. The address? Oh, they won't need it. Anyone can direct them to the bungalow. Nancy surveyed Laura's guardian curiously. Why was he so eager to get his ward away from them? From his response to Laura's question, she comprehended that he did not wish to encourage a visit to Melrose Lake. I'm afraid I must say goodbye, Laura told Helen and Nancy regretfully. Soberly, the three girls shook hands. Laura clung to Nancy an instant, and as their eyes met it seemed as though she were trying to tell her something. We must hurry, my dear, Jacob Aborn put in impatiently. With a show of affection, he carelessly permitted his hand to fall upon Laura's shoulder. Involuntarily, she cringed. Yes, I'm coming, she responded listlessly. Without another word, she turned and left the two girls. Jacob Aborn followed her into the hotel. Thoughtfully, Nancy and Helen walked toward the dock to await the coming of the passenger launch. It's a shame, Helen burst out after several minutes of silence. Yes, it is, Nancy Drew agreed. I don't blame Laura for not wanting to go to Melrose Lake. She isn't going to be happy with that guardian. I think she's going to be miserable, responded Helen. Why, that man is a perfect bear. At the dock, the two girls learned that the ferry would not be in for 15 minutes. So, rather than remain there, they strolled around the hotel grounds. That's the worst with choosing a guardian you haven't seen perhaps for years, was Nancy's comment as they walked along a path close to the side of the hotel. Laura's mother, when dying, may have thought her old school friend was as he had been in their early years. On the contrary, he has changed for the worse. The two girls walked along in silence for a minute. Then both came to a sudden pause. They're right over our head, whispered Nancy excitedly. Listen. The chums listened and were speedily made aware that they were directly under the second-story windows of the two rooms occupied by Laura and her guardian. The guardian was in the girl's room and talking to her in anything but a pleasing manner. I said you would get your things packed at once, snarled Jacob Aborn. And don't snivel any longer about those other girls and the way I treated them. I'm your guardian, and after this you'll do as I say. I'll get ready, answered Laura meekly. And please don't talk so loud or you'll upset the whole hotel. Never mind that, returned the man. I'll be ready in 10 minutes, and I want you to be ready too. After that there was silence, and with a meaning look between them, Nancy and Helen turned and walked back to the dock. It's simply awful. I wish I could do something for her, said Nancy, shaking her head sadly.